Okay, chapter 1, lies. Turns out the con man movies were right. I lied by telling the truth. I tell enough truth that the lie slipped through, and I wouldn't even know it. Paul and I stood at the dining room on opposite sides of our Amish-made cherry dining room table. You lied to me and you lied to yourself, he said. I bristled. How? I said, my palms pressing against the smooth oiled wood, grounding myself. Divorce was what I wanted. How am I lying to myself about this? Because you aren't honest with yourself. You say you want something and you say it so many times over and over to yourself that you believe it, but it's a lie. His voice shook. What an obnoxious and weird thing to say. I didn't lie to myself. I scanned over my life in full at that dining table, like microfiche at the county courthouses back in the 90s. Fast, 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 and stop, skimming and reading, then fast, fast, fast again. Holy shitballs. I stared at Paul through the midday light. I did lie to myself all the time. Conveniently, I mostly didn't know when I lied, but sometimes the dissonance of subconsciously knowing I was lying and not wanting to lie clanged louder than usual, and my eardrums tingled and my skin curdled. Other times, it was like a glitch in the matrix. I'd look up and think, did I just say that? I wasn't a pathological liar, and I didn't lie to other people, only myself. But there was the crux of it. When I lied to myself and I lived my life based on those lies, then I was effectively lying to others. I shook my head and walked away from Paul in our conversation, but I couldn't walk away from my thoughts. I should have been more horrified that, despite not identifying as a liar, I did, in fact, lie to people, including myself, and had done so my whole life. The truth was, I was more pissed at not being a better friend to myself. It was sad, really. How could I have so mistreated myself? Lying had prevented so much happiness, created so much pain, scats of it, and I was about to heap even more on myself. Looking back, I think I lied to be a good girl. Fear of judgment compelled me to lie. I was 39 years old when I learned to tell the truth. That's a long time to lie. It also takes a long time to learn how to tell the truth, too. A whole book, in fact. All right. Velociraptor, chapter 23. One day I was crying and journaling and deep in my process. When I turned the page to finish writing some vital point, I found a Velociraptor sticker lodged in the crease of my journal from my son's collection, and my thoughts scurried out the window and evaporated skyward. I felt a strange mixture of lightness and sorrow. Lightness because it was pretty silly to see a dinosaur peering out at me from the pages of my journal, like I caught him taking a shower. And sorrow because it seemed to always be that way. Just before I connected to spirit or muse and learned something vital to my personal growth, I faltered because of dinosaur stickers or my son greeting me from home before I even got out of the car because I was trying to steal a few minutes in the driveway to compose myself and journal after a counseling session, or just because I felt too drained to journal and watched a movie instead. Paul and I were not drifting apart, but what's the word? In ancient times and war, the city dwellers would fortify the forts, prepare for battle, and get ready for a rough road ahead. I sensed that Paul and I had done that, or we were getting ready to. We needed couples counseling, but I was too afraid to do it for real. Afraid to hurt Paul, afraid to get into a conversation or situation with Paul in counseling that created an irreconcilable divide and forever altered our relationship. My head hurt all the time. I avoided my kids. I avoided Paul. I avoided myself. I wonder what my writing group would say if I wrote about this. My writing group meant Paul's mom, since she was in the group. After I got home from yoga class the next day, Paul left for work, dropping Clover off at school. I made myself and Robert an omelet for breakfast, and we played with photo booth for a while. Then I unloaded the dishwasher, started a new load, wiped down the counters, and started a load of laundry. A sigh shuddered through me. My crushes were just fantasies, and I needed to be loyal to Paul because ultimately that'd bring us closer. Or was that a cop-out? I scrubbed my bathtub and put Robert in it for a bath. He played with toys in the bubbles while I wiped down the dining room table and picked up Xbox stuff in the living room. The truth was, Paul didn't satisfy me. But what if it was me who didn't satisfy me? I straightened the coffee table and looked around the room. Maybe my marriage depended on creating art. My artistic endeavors provided diversity and challenge and prevented boredom. A couple of hours later, I started some tomato soup on the stovetop because Robert only ate cheese sandwiches dipped in tomato soup these days. It's all he ever wanted for food. I think he was like 6 or something at this time. I checked in a couple of activity books to get some inspiration for a seasonal ritual to do with the kids. We had a nature table, really a windowsill in the dining room, where we left leaves and flowers or rocks, fairy things, to bring nature inside. And I totally forgot about the soup. It had completely boiled over. An entire family-sized can of Campbell's tomato coated the entire range top I had totally taken apart and scrubbed with seal wool and soap and hot water just that very morning. I almost cried. When Tamara came over that weekend, she'd just heard from our friend Julian that he'd done it. He'd served Tamara's husband the divorce papers. She sat on my bed, her back against the wall, and covered her eyes. No tears, but overstimulation, exhaustion. I brought her a cupcake with a glowing candle in it to celebrate. She laughed and blew it out. Later, she called to talk to her children who were with their dad. She cried then when she heard their voices. I'm living on my own in an apartment at this point. Kids, every other. And I'm dating. But I have a long distance boyfriend she never really wanted, or lies. So this chapter is not meant to be alone. Every other day, I turned around and ran into a Jake memory, one of the guys I dated. It seemed hardly fair because I'd only dated him for 6 weeks. Such a narrow window of time to accumulate memories, but there it was. One night I was feeling lonesome, so I asked Julian to come over. We didn't write together anymore, but I seemed to call on him more and more for an anchor, a spiritual tether. He was my friend, my platonic brother. He stayed with me when I was lonely. He stayed with me when he was lonely. And we talked, we danced, we ate. We cooked for each other and we took walks. We asked questions of each other and made observations about each other. And sometimes they were not what I wanted to hear. We tried fooling around once or twice, but it was too weird, incestuous. He'd only ever been a brother friend. That night, he held me and played with my hair for 2 hours. We fell asleep on the couch and woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning. We, half asleep, moved to the bedroom. The first hour on the couch, I'd been like a sponge, soaking up all the human skin touch. Only then did I reciprocate. But when I touched his forearm, I felt Nazim's arm, the long-distance boyfriend. When I draped my arm or leg over him, I felt Nazim's body under mine. It was unsettling. I felt disloyal and weak for wanting, needing touch from someone other than Nazim. No one should be alone, Julian said. We aren't designed for it. Irony of all ironies, or perhaps it was synchronicity. Julian told me out of the blue that Jake went to ecstatic dance too. The same community that Julian raved about, that was his tribe, that he'd been recommending I attend. I wonder if it's a sign. I started going soon after, and it was the best thing I could remember doing for myself. Not because Jake was there, it had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with me. I walked to the Wow Hall on 8th and Lincoln, mere blocks from my apartment. The weather was mild but gray. The breeze lifted my hair. I opened and closed my fists and watched the cracks in the sidewalk. I still tried to step over them. I was terrified. I swallowed and wiped my lips, blinked back tears. I didn't want to cry in front of anyone. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want anyone to look at me. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't want to go, but I promised Julian. He didn't make me promise. but I said I'd go, and that was the same thing. Julian knew me, knew my issues, my hangups, and he said it would be good for me to go, and I believed him. I really did, but I was still scared. Not scared, creeped out, but weird inside, like stage fright, like not breathing scared, like afraid of falling into myself and never coming out, stuck inside myself, trapped, scared of myself, scared of what I'd find inside if I looked. When I did this type of excavating with words, I knew how to monitor the depth. Sometimes I'd write a phrase that triggered a memory or emotion that got me crying, but I could stop writing if my emotions got too uncomfortable. I could avoid myself with the dishes or running errands, but dancing in front of people who'd want to interact? What if I faced something that I couldn't process in real time in public? I stopped across the street from the Wow Hall and looked both ways, but on a Sunday morning, on a not too busy street anyway, it was just a stalling technique. A few people talked out front on the steps. One walked from her car with a paper coffee cup in her hand. One man looked locked up his bicycle under the trees next to the building. I took a deep breath, crossed the street, and walked up the stairs into the building. I kept my head down and refused eye contact. Inside, several dozen people milled around, some stretching, some praying at an altar set up on the stage, some stowing coats and bags on the benches. Everyone took off their shoes. A circle of people started forming in the center of the room. Ambient music played from a laptop playlist hooked up to the venue's sound system. No one talked. Mildly relieved, I sat on a bench and took off my shoes. The playlist ended, and a facilitator called everyone to the circle. We held hands. Welcome to Coalescence, an ecstatic dance group. Any new people today? I reluctantly raised my hand. A couple of others did too. Welcome. We like to think of ourselves as a container for movement. Express yourself with any movement you want. There are a lot of bodies here today, though, so please be mindful as you move around so no one's hurt. This space is a no-speech zone. Please go out into the hall or lobby to talk, but if you feel called to make noise along with the music, you can. If you feel like dancing with someone, a good practice is to make eye contact first, to see if the person is open to a dance partner. We don't want to touch someone without their consent. And if you are approached and you don't feel like it, maybe smile and dance away from them. It's pretty easy to tell when people are open to dancing together. There are several house tenders here today, so if anyone feels unsafe or uncomfortable or just has a question, you can always come to any of us. A few of the people in the circle said hi and waved. With clasped hands, the circle collectively raised their hands and let go at the top. The man that led the circle went to the laptop and started a new playlist. Folks drifted to all areas in the room as the music moved through a spectrum of slow to fast in all different genres. Some did yoga, some laid on the floor, some hung out at the altar, some raged around the room, some did ballet, some danced together, rolling off each other and twining. I mostly swayed in the back, feeling out of place. But as the 2-hour window progressed, I felt less scared and stiff. I moved my body. I cried. I closed my eyes and felt the music move in my veins like blood. So I titled this book, You Can't Dance a Lie, because ecstatic dance actually was a huge part of my healing process after my divorce and long distance relationship with fantasy boyfriend, really. You'll find all about it later when you read the book. But I'm going to read a chapter called Dance Metaphor. It's really short, but sometimes when I would dance, well, I'll just read the chapter. I walked up the stairs to the dance floor at the Vets Club. Each step felt heavy and my knees already hurt, weighed down with depression and funk. I didn't feel like dancing that night. I felt like writing or crawling under wet leaves in a forest and smelling the loam of the earth in my nostrils. Dance was the perfect metaphor for life. Sometimes the music sucked. Sometimes the song ended before I was ready. And sometimes it dragged on. Sometimes I got smacked alongside the head, bumped, grabbed, or brushed against. And sometimes I danced my boundaries wide and demanded my space. Sometimes I danced with my eyes closed and got testy or even tearful if someone invaded my space, but I wasn't protecting it if my eyes were closed. Sometimes the song screamed for a partner even if there wasn't one for me. Sometimes the beats mirrored that of my blood pulsing through my limbs, and I felt hope blossom as I connected to the larger, to the everything. When that happened, I smiled and love seeped out and touched my tribe. I belonged. Other times I didn't feel safe. I couldn't hold my space, and I retreated to a corner, resentful that I couldn't stand or dance or lie down where I wanted. Sometimes I felt left out. Sometimes I cried because in dancing, I uncovered feelings or fears or truths. Sometimes I raged and fought the urge to give up and sit out of a dance or to not show up at all. Most times I found a new way of expressing what was real in me, and I was breathless with the knowledge that I might have missed it. Other times it felt fine to honor the impulse to sit down, to look at something else, to experience the sounds and messages with a different medium, listening from afar instead of swirling in the middle of it. Sometimes I felt disjointed and I didn't understand the meaning, the purpose, the why. The music set just didn't work for me. I wanted to dance through life with my eyes closed because I could best hear the songs that way, could hear how they moved me, hear their instructions from my soul, but people ran into me then and I got hurt. Dance was a perfect metaphor for life. Living my truth. The earth was gray and neutral like a soggy autumn, but really it was winter. I sat in my kitchen on the second day of the new year, 2012. I'd meant to spend my New Year's Eve tallying up the lists of things I wanted to accomplish during the year. Instead, Julian unexpectedly came home early from a trip and joined me for wine and dancing in my living room. Tamara was with her kids. When the clock read midnight, Julian and I lit candles in the dark and set our intentions for the coming year. I held his hands, said, "And so it is," and then threw open the door to let the new year come in. We watched a couple of fireworks explode a block or two away, then settled on the couch to watch a movie. It was a delightful New Year's Eve, and I didn't write any resolutions. However, in my white and smoky peach-colored kitchen with green slate tiles on the floor and all my windows uncovered to let the sun show bravely through the gray sky, I wrote my intention, not resolution, for the year. To live my truth every moment, even if it was scary. No more lying. To dance, to unleash, to walk in awe of beauty, to pray and honor the art that I found underneath the layers of that opaque film that covered our daily world, the one that most only saw up until I wanted to see beyond. How I was to live my truth came out differently than I said it on that day in my kitchen, but that was the essence. I thought about the unfolding I'd been doing the last 2 or 3 weeks. A metamorphosis was happening. I wasn't out of the chrysalis yet, but cells were definitely changing. And I thought the metamorphosis was because of dance. It seemed slightly embarrassing and cliche to say that joining the ecstatic dance community in Eugene was transformative, but there it was. The Wow Hall on 8th and Lincoln had become my church. Dancing every week with them had brought me more into my body, unsticking the stuck stuff. I was less in my head now, and while I was there, I thought about things in pictures. Or if the lists still came, they were lists of things that brought joy and bouncing. And who didn't want more bouncing in their spirit? Writing, poetry, photography, music, words, incense, bangles, fountains, praying. Do you pray? I asked Julian that New Year's Eve night. He stopped, jolted out of what he was doing, and looked at the ceiling. It depends on what you mean by pray. He laughed, either all the time or no. It was a brilliant answer. I found myself wanting to pray, part of this transformative dance work, no doubt, and not knowing quite how to do it or why I wanted to do it. But newly, I wasn't upset in the not knowing, and that felt pretty good. I was enjoying, and I must confess, slightly amused by that foray into praying again. It was funny to even consider it. I had been happily without God for years. Anyway, finding God was not my New Year's resolution nor intention. Living my truth every day was my intention. A much harder task, actually, living my truth. Living my truth every day involved knowing who I was, what I stood for, and why I stood for it. It involved a sense of awareness, always scanning for ways in which I wasn't living rightly. And by rightly, I meant right to myself. It involved walking in dark places on purpose, because passing through the shadows would lead to personal growth, a more real me, a truer me. And that was all I wanted for that year, to solidify the truest me I had the strength for, to be emotionally courageous, and to remember that the truth of me changed over time. I was my own living document. And if I was aware enough, I would actively live that change, live that truth as it changed. Chapter 71, moving on. Coffee rusted in one of Nazim's old mugs on the windowsill next to me. The coffee machine clicked to a restful period, and my dog alternately crunched his breakfast or licked his doggy lips and swallowed. I'd done my puja and smudged the house with Nagchampa. I'd offered my prayers without words to the gods, Ganesh, Lakshmi, the goddess, and Durga. Humphrey drank water, came to nuzzle me, and then waited at the back door to be let out. I didn't rise from my journal writing in the otherwise quietness of the house until I heard the bell ring. Humphrey's bell, the one he pushed with his nose, sending it swinging from the twine tied to the doorknob. I sipped from my coffee cup and contemplated my unworded prayers in my manuscript. I was writing Smell the Blue Sky during this time. My cell phone signaled a text received. Delaying my prayers a little longer, I got my phone from the charger in the kitchen. The sky was gray today with a misting of rain, the first of the season. I was glad. My grass was dead from the heat of the summer and early autumn, and I longed for its return to the green. I wanted to redo the yard and make it a growing place again, remove the blackberries, weed the raspberries, and tie up and stake the canes. I wanted to fix the lawnmower, get a good mowing in before the winter, and prepare 2 small garden beds. My thoughts drifted back to my manuscript. What can I put into my memoir to infuse it with the something that will touch the reader? The bananas in the red ceramic bowl were spotting brown, and my stream of consciousness shifted to worry about my firewood not getting split in time for the cold. It was time to prepare for winter. It was time to nest. My unwhispered prayers that morning were help stay connected to source, help to check in with myself every day, and help in the continuation of the teeny tiny forward momentum away from my fantasies. I thought about the reason Nazim and I came together. I'd speculated on many things, but one semi-new one came up for me. To always speak the heart's truth, even if it was raw, confusing, contradictory, painful, scary. Because if I did, the real hopes, the ones I didn't dare to dream, came true, or at least had the possibility of coming true. During our last visit together, Nazim and I had talked about sacrifice versus compromise and what we'd sacrifice for our relationship. I learned I could sacrifice for love, but when it no longer worked, when I wanted to call in my sacrifice, it was the doing so without guilt that was the problem for me. Nazim told me he and his date kissed last Friday. I didn't feel jealous. It was actually nice to have the type of relationship with Nazim that would allow such a discussion. We'd reached another milestone. I went to check my phone one more time and refilled my coffee cup before settling in to manuscript edits. The theme at dance the next night, conveniently enough, was letting go, but the music didn't seem to match. It was far too headbangy for me, not what I felt called to dance to at all. Afterward, Julian invited himself over for dinner, which was no problem, but he also wanted to have a potluck gathering. I felt like holding up despite my loneliness, so I said yes. It was the only way to pull out of my depression. Sometimes, most times, there is a point where a break happens, a place you can't bear to go anymore, a line you can't cross anymore. You are fed up with yourself, with the way things are. Even if the approach to that line is gradual and you can't see the threshold you're crossing, you just look around suddenly and realize where you are, that you can't go back to that old way, old belief, old house, old love, old lie. For me, it was a series of lies, lies that I lived and believed. But when I crossed that threshold, breaking up with Nazim, I went back. I went back to the dark place of lies. I thought perhaps that's where I was supposed to be. But when I looked back at the crossed threshold and peered out into the fresh, new, leafy green place with no lies, the darkness behind me became dank and fetid, unbearable. So I stepped into the freshness, convinced this was the better place, the better way. Despite that, I went back to the dark, but this time I just went for my luggage. This time I was making a permanent move. All right, here's the cute little short one. It's called You Match. Well, Ali and I had had sleepovers before. It was the first one that coincided with when the kids were over, and I was a little worried about what they would think. Robert, especially, had disliked Nazim. I wouldn't give the kids veto power, but I couldn't imagine having to maneuver around child hostility with the man I was with. It was important to me for them to like Ali. Tamara came over the next morning too, on purpose. I wanted the house full and for it to somehow magically seem normal that Ali was already there. It seemed strange that it hadn't already happened, but somehow it was the first time that Ali and Tamara would meet too. I wasn't worried that she wouldn't like him though. How could she not? I was more anxious for the meeting to take place so that we could slip into Three Musketeer status. All for one and one for all and all that. I wanted Tamara to be family for Ali like she was for me. We were soul sisters because we both had a blood sister who didn't care for us. We'd adopted one another. When Tamara arrived and I made the introductions, she smiled and hugged and did all the normal things one does when meeting important people. We interacted for a few minutes more while Ali played with Tamara's ukulele, let Humphrey in and out, talked with the kids, served coffee, and lounged on the couch. And then Tamara sat up and smiled really big. You match, she said. She actually cooed it. You match. Which was the perfect thing to say. She saw it. She saw why I fell for him so quickly. Ali and I did match. My face warmed and my fingertips tingled. In fact, in my memory, this was the first thing out of her mouth, but my brain says it couldn't have been. Later, I assumed she'd said all those necessary how do you do's first. We matched. All right, one last one. Again, it was hard to find like something at the end of the book that wouldn't be like total spoiler. Okay, this one's called Travel, the Anti-Quest. It was that time in our relationship where I would meet the mom. Early in 2015, I went to India with Ali and met his mom for the first time. I was both terrified and thrilled. Visiting India had been on my wish list for years, even before Ali. I once had a plastic bucket in my bedroom labeled India, where I put my waitressing tips. Mostly I lived off the tips and dipped into the bucket to buy food, so I never got to go. I buzzed with excitement in the months leading up to our vacation. After we arrived and made our way through the lines, through customs, paperwork, and exchanging money, we pulled our suitcases out into the sticky air. Temporary waist-high metal partitions formed a large semi-octagon around the exit, shielding the disembarking travelers from the waiting public. I just realized there's a Turkish sentence in here. Do you want to come up and read the one Turkish sentence? No? I might skip that one. We scanned the crowd and there she was. We waved. I felt nervous. What should I call her? Should I kiss her hand like Ali did as a child for his grandfather? Should I touch her feet? No, that was Indian, not Turkish. But we were in India. And here she was in an Indian dress with her Indian friend Bina. Ali leaned over the partition. Merhaba, Anam nabar güzellik. He kissed her cheeks. I should totally get applause for that. Come on. I know like 8 Turkish words. Those were not one of them. He kissed her cheeks. And this is Valerie, he said, smiling, proud, travel-worn. Should I kiss her? I leaned over and offered a hug. She grasped me firmly, and I instantly felt her love. I shook Bina's hand, which morphed into an awkward half hug. Fatma, whom I later called Anne, Mom, one word I know, and her friend Bina led us to an opening in the partition, and we followed them to the car. Our driver took us to a marvelous old hotel that used to be luxurious. I started taking pictures immediately. Some people go on trips to find themselves or to have mystical experiences. I went to India with no such quest. I just wanted to experience anything. Ali devoured the travel guidebook. He picked out the places he wanted to see. He planned. He memorized names of cities and temples. I, for the first time in my life, did not. Instead, I received. I followed. I looked. What I saw was what I came for. India, land of bright colors, banyan trees, and street dogs. Cows, goats, and dogs slept in the middle of the road and ate everything, even trash, maybe especially trash. On one drive, I saw fireworks, a wedding procession, and goats peeing all at the same intersection at the same time. Later that day, there was a parade in the street with music. The reason? Someone old had died, and they were happy, celebrating a long life. There were many shepherds on the roads there, herding goats or hanging out with their cows while the animals ate the roadside or field grass. Ambulance drivers stopped and peed on the side of the road, but not dealing with emergencies. Along with the dogs and goats, the streets teemed with rickshaws, scooters, bicycles, people, vendors, and trash right alongside the cars. Cars were actually the minority, with, I'd say, only about a third of the road. Exhaust was everywhere. Scooters carried everything, jars for water, wood stacks, or up to 4 people at a time, including infants. Indians rarely observed stop signs. Horn signals allowed other drivers, cyclists, walkers, and animals to know a vehicle was coming and to get out of the way. People drove their scooters on major highways and small city streets without shoes, helmet, or protective clothing, just naked feet and lungies, a sarong worn by men, a shirt, perhaps a scarf or earmuffs. We either walked or took rickshaws to most of our destinations. The only taxis we rode in were to and from airports with our luggage or for day trips to faraway temples. I had little culture shock at all. Thanks to Nazim, I knew how to use a squat toilet, and I faced one first thing off the plane in the Chennai airport, and with no paper. I was fairly adept at the squatting part, and thanks to the education of my ex-boyfriend, I didn't pee on my clothes one bit. It was the water part I was still clumsy with, but no matter. I learned to take napkins and toilet paper with me in my pockets or bag whenever I left the hotel. The next time I go to India, I'll also take those little bottles of travel hand sanitizer I can pass through security checkpoints with at airports. If the toilets had running water to wash my hands with after pooping in a hole in the ground, there usually wasn't soap. I'm not a germaphobe, but when I managed to get poop on my hand while trying to handle cleaning myself with water at a squat toilet in a salwar kameez with no toilet paper, even though I miraculously found 2 small and partially used napkins in my purse with only marginal amounts of curry stains on them, and then found no soap at the hand washing station, I knew it was time for some hand sanitizer. It thrilled me to find, an hour later, that our lunch destination had soap and running water. Even after washing my hands twice, my middle-class white girl North American heebie-jeebies forbade me to eat the South Indian way with my hands. I was quite adept at it and even impressed a few locals, but that meal had me using a fork, let me tell you. I rarely wore perfume, but there were a couple of times while passing a polluted river or an especially pungent pile of trash when I was grateful to hold a lightly scented dupatta, large scarf or shawl, or handkerchief to my nose. I didn't need to adjust to the food, the heat. I regularly did yoga in 104-degree heated room, the music, or most of the culture. I knew that when speaking to police, taxi drivers, or restaurant hosts, that they'd look instead to my white male companion. I knew to look down after making eye contact with a man. I knew beggars would accost me everywhere. I knew rickshaw drivers would charge us double or more, the going rate. Ali's mom, having lived off and on in India for 5 years and had been visiting it for 30, told us to always insist on the use of their meter. If they said no, or it's broken, you should walk away and go to the next one. We wouldn't have to walk far. Driving was definitely only for the locals. There were rules, a rhythm, and a horn language completely unlearnable to anyone else not growing up there. In fact, that was the only culture shock I experienced in India, and it wasn't so much shock as fear. By my North American standards, Indians drove recklessly, too fast, rudely, and dangerously. Mostly, I reminded myself there was a system to the driving, and as a foreigner, I just had to let go of any fear of road death. It helped to close my eyes. After about 4 days of straight, all-day-long sightseeing, I had headaches from clenching my jaws, a byproduct of some of those drives, and the constant interruptions of beggars, street vendors, would-be guides, and rickshaw drivers trying to take us somewhere. My body was sore everywhere, and my feet swelled with the extra walking on uneven ground. I clearly hadn't paced myself. I gave myself 24 hours to recover with room service, feet up in bed, an English-speaking movie on the hotel TV, and an early bedtime. Ali and I lounged the next morning with books and shortened our excursions from that point on to 1 or 2 sites per day. Halfway through our travels, we flew to Pune, where Ali's mom had an apartment, and we stayed with her, slowing our travel and sightseeing pace even more. A welcome respite for a book lover like me. I read 4 books in 13 days and still took a walk every day, saw the Osho meditation gardens, watched 2 movies at the Indian cinemas, pretty posh, went to a Parvati temple, visited friends of the family, shopped for sari and salwar kameez fabrics, got measured for said clothing to be sewn at the tailor's, had a couple of chappals, sandals, fixed, and took many rickshaw rides. Did I learn about myself on this anti-quest? Not especially, except that maybe I could let go and just let others be in charge. I just followed. Sure, whatever, I'm just here to experience, became my travel motto. Going to India wasn't just for the guru inspired. I didn't need a quest to travel to another continent and have an elephant eat flowers out of my hair, which actually happened. I just went and soaked up my surroundings, heard different languages spoken and listened to streets coming awake, stepped out of the ordinary and walked on a beach littered with human feces. I even cleaned myself of all my sins in the town of Rameshwaram, in the 22 wells at the Swami temple, and accidentally got married. Truth.